Desk to break down that match.
Thank you, gentlemen. Well, we were talking about what would change in Champion Select. A lot changed here. We had 4 different bans, only 2 shared bans between the games, Hecarim, Urgot, and then a slew of new picks and traded contested picks as we were pointing
Someone
out.
said force shout on Yasuo.
Yeah. So
This guy.
I don't know how you force someone to last pick Yasuo, but we'll give it to you because success was found. Yasuo was not successful in that game. Overall, though, yeah, the Rumble first pick from Quas was really huge. Being able to take that away from Impact, and Impact had a very underwhelming game on Morgana.
Yeah, that's definitely a big issue. I think the biggest story is the Sejuani for Dominate. Dominate very, very comfortable on the champion. We already saw him perform with this champion, who's extremely strong right now, and brings so much to team fighting. Team fighting is king between these two teams.
Yeah.
And after that first combo of Sejuani and Ultimate, you got a feeling for how the rest of the fights were going to go.
Fool him once, wind wall with the Sejuani ultimate.
Now and again.
Every other fight, like there was this wind wall that was this one small piece on the map, and that was usually able to be burned. Then they could come in with the Sejuani from one side. They could throw Twitch that always came from a different angle than the Sejuani to make sure that one of them always got their damage off. A lot of things went right for Team Liquid with what looked like a somewhat questionable team comp in Champ Select really played out well in game.
Yeah, interestingly, and I don't want to jump too far back to the other game, I just realized that Sejuani was open in that first game. Team Liquid decided to forego it for the Rek'Sai being unsuccessful so far in this series, and that's where I kind of want to go, back to Rush. The Gragas, they banned it away themselves this time. Didn't even give themselves the option of playing it if Liquid does go for the Sejuani, or, fine, if Dominate goes for Gragas, we'll take Sejuani and have a playmaking tank champion that can initiate.
Well, they took the Rek'Sai, which they thought Dominate may have been prioritizing higher since he did allow to go through in the first game. But sometimes you switch them up. Sometimes that first game, the winner of the first game in these team series doesn't win the last semifinals.
All right, let's dive into the actual gameplay, though, here, because we spent a lot of time on the picks. The lane matchup-wise, Twitch found himself in the 2v2, went down very early. Things didn't look too great with Piglet down a fair amount of CS, holding on to only a Vamp Scepter for a very long period of time in that game. But then you look across to the mid lane, Phoenix was just beating up on Xiao. And it kind of evened the playing field there in terms of CS. And, we didn't see a team fight until Piglet got that that Bork. And so I feel like the early advantage that they had in their AD carry on the side of Team Impulse wasn't utilized properly.
All it really feels like you're trying to do when you're on Twitch is survive. Sivir is not the strongest laner, but when you're up against Twitch with Ajana, you become a much stronger laner. And I think for Team Impulse, they needed the Yasuo to get ahead to have a split pushing threat, because ultimately when he didn't get ahead, it forced Team Impulse into taking team fights where they still could have won because they had a strong Sivir, a pretty strong Morgana at that point, had a lot of CDR and a blue buff, but team fighting was king in this game.
Well, that's the thing, though, Kobe. They seem to pick themselves into a position where if they didn't have a substantial early game lead, there was no way out for them. As Jat mentioned, there was some team fight potential for Impulse if they were ahead, but when you're going up against Sejuani Rumble, like, you're relegating yourself to not team fighting after a certain point in the game.
I feel like that Rumble takeaway really threw them off. And defaulting back to the Morgana, they're definitely not going to be the champion that's going to take over the game for Impulse. They need Impact to be the one to take over the game, because Xiao is not going to do it.
Right, and so
on Yasuo.
Yeah, I do want, or at least not on Yasuo. I do want to jump into our replay. We're going to go 24 minutes into the game, because this is the illustration of that team fight that Liquid is capable of with this composition, and it gets them back into the game. We're going to pull that up for you guys right now, and I'll let Jat. Yeah, Jat's going to walk us through it.
Absolutely pristine. All the things. Let's roll this right now, because all we're watching for is the I Will Dominate ultimate, and immediately Quas puts down his equalizer, and Piglet opens up for spray and pray. It's everything they could want. So first off, I Will Dominate. He gets knocked around when he says, you know what, I'll just point blank ult you. As the equalizer was coming out, I swear they must use those spells at the same time. They just both saw the play and made the play. Piglet, even though he opened up, he got a lot of damage off. He ends up falling down because this was actually Impulse being ahead coming into that fight. Even with that glorious combo, it was still just a 2 for 3, but the fact that they could pull it off was threat enough, and they continue to do so throughout the game.
Quas is always such a calm guy, and you can see as soon as they get out of the Yasuo ultimate, he does not bat an eye. He's like, he turns around, he ultimates, he turns on his flamethrower, and then he Zhonya's. Like the perfect 3 sequence of button presses that you need to make just in time for Dominate also getting out of the Yasuo ultimate. Boom. Game over.
Right. So this is an example of where Team Liquid can shine when their communication is very clear, as you mentioned. Like those spells seem to layer on top of each other. The communication is obviously there in those moments. So I feel in order for Team Liquid to have success through the rest of the series, their communication has to be on par with how it was this game.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. They also need to make sure they have the champions that are capable of that type of synergy. Because if we look at their Game 1 team composition, yeah, Vladimir and Zed can use their ultimates at the same time, but that combination still isn't as spectacular as Sejuani and Rumble.
All right. We do have, it's a slightly non sequitur, but we do have an LCS big play from that match that we have to call out. At Benatti 2K writes, that red steal was especially nice. Here it is.
Yeah, this one caught us off guard a little bit when we were watching on stream because we were wondering why Xiao Xiao walked away from the red buff. It looked like he was trying to carry distance and then cue back into it for the last hit.
But yeah, I was like, he's waiting for it to give it over to Sivir, maybe.
Right. He was waiting to give it to Thresh.
That's what happened. There you got it.
I think it was give it to Sivir. Yeah.
Success. All right. Well, you know, I want to do one quick note on what we think needs to happen here for Team Impulse, again, because they're going to be on the same sides. As we mentioned, it's blue for Team Liquid in the next 2 games, Impulse red for the next 2 games. This implies that because they chose red, they have red side strategies. Will they come out with something wildly different than what we saw this game?
I think that Impulse are going to come out with a teamfight focused composition that actually has a big front line. They need either Impact or Rush, I'd say Impact, to be the actual point man for this squad, because I feel like this series is going to boil down to teamfight execution. Yeah,
I think their bans change a little bit based on how well Quas did on Rumble. If they just leave Hecarim and Rumble and take whatever's left for them, they can try and allow Impact to outplay in that way. That's maybe one tweak I'd see them making.
We saw the Gnar in the first game, banned out second game, still some other top lane tanks available to him. We'll keep it tuned right here. In just a few minutes, we'll head back into the Rift for Game 3 between Team Liquid and Impulse. You're watching the North American LCS playoffs.